Hey Brett, good to see you. Gosh, I just
Great.
having a good morning, seeing you yet
You get
again.
twice of
And
me. This is
I
great.
have to say, I love what I do, and I love what you do and how you do it. So we're here to talk about how we can better understand what's happening with remote work, particularly as kids go back to school or not. So if you would please introduce yourself and a little bit of what you do there at Perceptyx.
Absolutely. Thanks, Al, for having me. So my name's Brett Wells, and I have the pleasure of being the Director of People Analytics at Perceptyx. And Perceptyx, we really focus on continuous listening, employee listening strategies with employee surveys, a variety of different types all throughout the life cycle. And then importantly, leveraging those data with people analytics to really drive decision making, make better decisions. So I have the pleasure of working with our clients on those aspects, particularly around their data and how to drive action.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you also have done some great research, not only for your clients, but for the public at large, and it's been hugely helpful. And I'm not going to put you on the spot to bring up some slides, but if you want to, just know that that would be in play. You're not going to shock me. So, but what I want to do is set the stage here. Is that we have this remote work situation, and we have kids who are at home. And we just had a discussion earlier about what can organizations do about it, given the realities that are present. And so, if you would, can you share some of the highlights from the research that you've just completed? And this is something that you've done over time now, so you have some longitudinal data and insights. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the most powerful things is looking at any kind of trend. And to have a trend, you need time, right? So, as
Yeah.
opposed to these point in time studies, I remember what going on almost 3, 4 months ago. We were on a call looking at the initial reactions in terms of the shift to working from home. And we asked employees then what percentage want to go back to the workplace. We saw a healthy 30-35% want to go back to the workplace. And as we asked more and more people over time, now with a database of nearly 750,000 employees at some of the world's largest global organizations, that has dwindled and dwindled dramatically to just about 5% who want to go back to the office. And mirroring that or blending that with self-reported productivity data, we're seeing that productivity has increased. So the practice effect has worked, at least for the short term. Now, of course, it's only self-reported measures of productivity. We're not getting any kind of actual output. But nevertheless, the self-report of employees is I'm remaining productive. I might be feeling like I'm working longer, right? The day is getting stretched, but I'm getting just as much, if not more, done. And I don't need or want to go back. With the return to school, though, that poses a interesting kind of inflection point. What are parents gonna think or feel in this future? And before we get there, it's nice to kind of get a sense of what's going through their minds already. And I think the most alarming statistic to share is 60% of parents feel that it's going to place an extremely large burden, very large disruption on their family with this return to school. And it's not the return to school that I remember where I'm going into the store, picking out all my school supplies, I get on the bus, I go to school, and I get to hug all those friends I haven't seen in a while, right? It's going to look very different. In many places, there is no return to the physical traditional school, it's done completely remote. So it's just been an interesting time to really ask parents in particular what they're thinking and feeling with the return and complement that with how some organizations are responding. Some are
And
prolonging the
listen,
return to work, right?
yeah, yeah, they absolutely are. And so, that's where I wanted to jump in and ask not only what you see organizations doing that you're a fan of, that you think's working well, but also what's not being done that you would hope be done more? Because I think we've, in our earlier discussion, acknowledged that this is a reality that we're all going to have to deal with. Some, like Google, have been more forthright in saying, okay, not till July 2021 will we be coming back to the office, if then, so people can plan ahead accordingly. What are some of your ideas and things that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, if I'm using the data to make any kind of recommendations, I'd say that one group that needs really special attention right now are moms. So when we look at how the return to school is affecting the family differently, although, and we talked about this earlier, although we've made a lot of progress over even just the last 10 years in terms of the caregiving responsibilities and moms and dads kind of both shouldering that load, by large, moms are still the ones doing the primary caregiving. And you think of all of the efforts over the last over decades to get women into senior leadership positions. They are the ones, unfortunately, feeling the biggest burden and anxiety with this return to school. And what I'd hate to see happen is this mass exodus of women leaders focusing on children and the home life when there's been so much progress and a lot of crosses to bear, so to speak, to get them into these positions to begin with. To hit reset on that would be a huge travesty. So one group to pay attention to in particular are those mother leaders and the multiple hats that they have to wear during this time.
Yeah, thanks for calling that out. I mean, it's obviously a critical challenge for everyone, especially moms and particularly those of young kids where that need, more care. And we have this, again, acknowledging reality. Public schools are effectively free in most places around the country. And thus, kids are being taken care of for a certain duration. And I don't see anything happening over the near term where we're going to take funds that were formerly allocated for schools and put them in daycare centers or places that support little pods of kids so parents can work. That's not going to happen, at least over the near term. So given that reality, what do you think can or should be done to help not only moms, but those who have young kids and sometimes single parents? Is it reducing workload? Is it helping get staff? Is it paying for childcare? Accounting for the safety concerns, of course. What are some of the ideas that you see that are either working or that should be considered?
Yeah, great question. I think of Amazon, and they've opened daycare centers for their employees to drop off kids where their employees still need to go into all these facilities to get their job done. Many employees still don't have the luxuries like we do, where here's my home office. This is where I get to go in and plug in and work every day. There's still so many that have to go to that physical workplace every day. I think schools need to partner even stronger with the other kind of community organizations. So my wife sits on a children's museum board, and they're thinking of how can we create an environment where the parents are not able to take their kids to school. Either the school's closed or they don't feel safe going into large rooms and hallways filled with kids bumping elbows, but they can drop them off where they have a room, just a handful of kids, they can socially distance, help them with their schoolwork. So I think, by and large, we have to get very creative on how do we keep kids safe while they can still learn and grow in all these important areas, emotionally, socially, cognitively, despite not maybe going to that physical school. And I know that's what's on the minds of so many parents. We see that in the data.
It's a real interesting conundrum is emerging where, as an organizational leader, there's only so much you can do, arguably. Meaning, okay, that's the family is going to have to take care of that. That local community is going to have to take care of that. We as an organization can only do so much. So understanding where those boundaries are, and correct me if I'm wrong from your perspective, they're not very clear. So I would hope that organizations reach out to the extent that they can, given the financial constraints and other realities that prevent them from just paying everybody for doing 4 hours of work each day. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But discovering those boundaries, can you speak to that? And is there anything in the data that speaks to, hey, this is on you as a parent in your community versus what the organization can do?
Yeah, well, interestingly, we ask employees to what extent they feel their organization's providing that flexibility and support, especially when they're thinking of childcare responsibilities during the workday. And what we're finding, and perhaps to no surprise, is the employees who feel that sentiment to a stronger degree are also the ones more likely to stay working and want to continue working at that employer in particular. So more than 90% of those employees intend to stay working over the next 12 months. Compare that to employees who don't feel that support for their employer, despite kind of all this gray, blurry zone. More than 33% are planning to leave that employer over the next 12 months. Think of any large organization, just a 1 percentage point decrease in turnover can save millions, if not tens of millions of dollars. And you're talking about going from 90% retention down to 70% retention. That's a lot of dollars and cents. So regardless if they want to play in that zone, there's at least certainly a financial carrot hanging out in front of them why they need to pay attention right now in particular.
And we've touched on this in the past, and it's the reality that different organizations and different industries and different geographies all have different dynamics at play. Some are shrinking, some are steady state in terms of the amount of throughput that they're producing. In other words, they're going to stay at the same staffing levels. Others are still hiring and doing quite well, given the nature, thinking, markets. And also then there's those who are suffering and they're thinking about, downsizing, and people have anxiety around the security of their job. So this comes back to this notion of productivity that we talked about. What is your thinking around productivity? Because I know you're asking this explicitly in the research that you're doing, and there's a bunch of landmines in it, but I just want to get your take on how productivity is measured and how we should be thinking about it, in this age of remote work.
Yeah. Well, I think, certainly as we go more and more away from the physical workplace, we're going to see far more measurement opportunities in this digital space for productivity. The caveat is, I think productivity has been one of those things that has always been very nebulous and hard to define. And you ask 100 people, you'll get 100 different definitions. I think on one extreme, you have where every keystroke can be tracked and measured. On another far extreme, you might have an annual review where someone's checking a box in terms of a level of productivity, on a scale of does not meet expectations to far exceeds how productive were they. And I think somewhere in between there is going to be a better definition of how we measure it. I think the important thing of thinking of how we measure it is looking at the overall construct and trying to get as many different data pieces as possible to puzzle together to tell a complete story. So in our research to date, we've looked at just the perceptions of the employees, how they're feeling, but I'm looking forward to shifting the attention to what managers are thinking of the teams they lead. How has it been on their perception? Are their teams just as productive? Is it harder to get in contact with them, etc.? And then lastly, it's looking at actual output numbers. So are sales up? Are they down? What's some other types of productivity metrics that go beyond just the perception? I might be, feeling, so to speak, that I'm getting a lot done, but I'm not scoring the baskets in terms of how the organization's keeping score. So I think wrestling with all of that and trying to understand the whole picture and not just one perception is going to be really important.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, from your perspective, how organizations keep score needs, in many cases, if not most cases, needs to be rethought and redesigned. Because if we have that old construct applied to a new reality that doesn't mesh, it's probably going to be counterproductive, be disengaging. And my worry, like yours, is going to affect the well being of individuals. In other words, they're going to be stressed out. They're going to be asked to do things that they
Hmm.
can't do, particularly with kids running around behind. Are you thinking similarly?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a client meeting, and my approach is always to work backwards. So let's start from what success looks like. And when we're doing employee listening strategy, we're trying to build a strategy around moving metrics that really matter to them. And often,
Mhm.
productivity comes up as something really important. I say, great. Well, tell me about how you're measuring productivity today. They describe it, and then often there's a caveat, but we don't believe in, and there's no veracity or truth to any of that data. And like anything, garbage in, garbage out. There's so much discussion around the criterion problem. We always focus a lot of attention on how do we build better measures to select the people we bring in and to engage them once they're in here and to develop them and to retain them. And far less attention, I feel, is paid towards the outcomes. We just take it as the kernel of
Mhm.
truth, like, oh, the sales numbers. Those are perfectly measured. There's no other influential factors in that, or productivity, or performance reviews, or so there's certainly plenty of room for improvement on that side of the equation as well.
And that requires us as organizational leaders to let go of these legacy, sometimes language legacy mindsets, and innovate. And that invites the question, is there, from your perspective and those you're working with, an adequate appetite to innovate? Um, for me personally, I've seen it highly variable. I've seen some like this is the new normal, and the new normal is dealing with disruption constantly. There are others who are trying to fit the old into this new box, and they're just being too slow and letting go, arguably. What's your take on the need to innovate? Are you seeing enough of that out there, or do you still think there's a lot of room that we need to go to truly get to a place where, okay, I'm valued as an employee. I'm not going to be, pressed for this esoteric notion activity and this inappropriate measure that what is created is now going to be more appropriate, more fair, and I'm now going to have a better chance to succeed given everything that's happening behind me working from home. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, great question. I think the conundrum or the mindset that if it's not broke, don't fix it. But so many
Hmm.
are realizing that those measures are fundamentally flawed or broken. Take, for example, turnover. Even just measuring regrettable turnover. One organization I was working with, they have managers after the fact, after employees leave, they go in and mark it, was it regrettable or not? There's so many biases that come into play, and I just think of, imagine being broken up by your significant other. Well, of course you're over it. You're so glad you're in a better spot without them, and that's kind of that manager perception, and that's just always how they did it.
Hmm.
Instead, we looked at, well, what if we looked at performance up until that point? What if we looked at they flagged them as a high potential? All of a sudden, we're getting all these indicators before the event to classify them as being regrettable turnover, as opposed to, well, you broke up with me, so therefore,
Yeah.
of course, I'm over it. It's not regrettable. So they were running into this issue where hardly anyone was labeled as regrettable turnover. And when just walking through that thought exercise with them, they were far more open to, well, what other data can we pull in? And we can also take this burden off of managers every time their employee leaves to flag in their HRIS whether it was regrettable or not. So,
Uh,
again, kind of working backwards from what success looks like, and going through some of these, for a lack of a better term, these logical thought experiments of what's really going on and what behaviors are you getting based on how you're rewarding or kind of punishing in that paradigm is really important.
Yeah,
But I do
I
see
love.
that. Oh, go ahead, Al.
No, you go. You finish that thought, please.
I was just going to say, but I do see, right now with all this disruption, far more organizations are willing to kind of throw out the old playbook and let's start something from scratch. What got us to this point isn't going to get us where we need to go in this new normal. So let's rethink these metrics. Let's have conversations about measuring things differently on the outcome side as well as the input side.
Yeah, there's definitely an Einstein quote in there, which we'll reference. But yeah, I mean, the same mindset, obviously. So my question that I got inspired to ask is the idea of first who, then what. So I love your working backwards model. It aligns with the way I think about the work as well. But then it invites the question, who needs to be thinking about the ideal future state and setting that mark for the vision and working backwards? Is it the CHRO? Is it a governance body that represents multiple functions? What do you see most beneficial, whether that be organizations that are doing it well, or maybe organizations are just doing it suboptimally right now and you would advocate something new? How best to proceed in forming this ideal future state?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's more important of who you get in the room and why, and then figure out that what. I think as you're kind of alluding to, and for me, I just think just the other day I was on a client call and they're thinking of going into a meeting with completely changing the strategy going forward in terms of their business, and they want to survey and the who was still unclear, but to survey to kind of get a sense of what are different areas of the business thinking in terms of the direction we're heading. And there's certainly a lot of pros and cons, whether you just rip off a Band-Aid and ask everybody. Alternatively, if you just ask leadership or this population, so it runs a lot of risk, but where we ended up going is just asking a lot of questions. So kind of practicing the art of humble inquiry and asking, what do you hope to use these data for? What do you think will happen if you don't ask these groups versus ask? And often what I would say is not necessarily the culture that they currently have decides their decision, but the culture that they're aspiring to be. So those cultures that want to be more inclusive and are working towards that, it's a good marker to move towards trying to emulate that by asking more people's perceptions and participation in that. Other organizations, very still a hierarchical, kind of top down. We make the decisions and it kind of trickles through, and that's how it's always worked. They lean more towards a handful of people that are going to provide feedback, and likely not in a survey. It'll just be in a board meeting kind of conversation. So it's a whole gamut, and it's really about meeting organizations where they're at and trying to develop that strategy to get them to where they're going.
Before, when we could get together, you could go to an offsite for a few days and do this work.
Right.
Not that many organizations were doing that, but now we're in this place where we have to do some slow thinking. Sometimes that's done individually, sometimes it's in a group, and now it's like a Zoom meeting, and so it's hard. And so what I'm seeing is not many leadership teams having the patience to go through the process, and thus they're putting Band-Aids on this, kind of hoping that it passes and we can get back to kind of this new normal that I keep hearing. The fact is, and what I see, is that we are in this new normal. Remote work is here to stay. Your data reflects that you've just put forth. And even if it does go back to normal, is going back to what we did before actually optimal from an employee perspective, from an organizational perspective, from a societal perspective? So all these disruptions, and if we don't create the space on how work should get done to benefit all these key stakeholders, then we're going to miss the mark. This legacy mindset, the
Mm-hmm.
legacy process, legacy data aren't going to work. So my question to you, as you share your insights from your research and work with your clients, what are you advocating as a productive next step? I'm sure that, to your point, you meet them where they are, but is there like any firm recommendations or stances that you take to say, if you're going to achieve this ideal future state, first you're going to have to define it better, and we're here to help. Maybe, I mean, what are your recommendations to the best next step given these realities?
Yeah, working with 400 different organizations, I think every organization's strategy that we ultimately arrive at is a little bit different. But the
Mm-hmm.
process we go through to get there is very much the same. So
Mm-hmm.
starting with stakeholder interviews, one-on-one, not the focus group where we can kind of get into groupthink or we all sway on one side or the most powerful or verbose person in the room gets heard. Really doing some one-on-one deep dives to understand what do they like about the current state, where are they trying to go in the future, and then really articulating strategy around that, presenting it back.
Yeah.
Listened.
I,
Here's how we think you should
yeah.
respond.
Yeah,
I
it
would
all
also
starts
add,
with, yeah, go ahead. I just love that you're talking about asking the questions first and creating the
yeah,
space to it. Because I'm dumbfounded to say, oh, guy, we're going to formulate a retention strategy. Well, or a remote work strategy. Well, have you asked people of what they think and feel, and have you asked what the ideal culture you want to create? So that's what I'm hearing you say, is that that work needs to be done. So I know you had a couple more comments as we start to wrap. So please, I apologize to
yeah. I was
interrupt.
just gonna share. No, that's great. I was just gonna share one more interesting kind of finding. So I think there's the common notions of both survey fatigue, um, as well as this continuous asking. And looking across all of our clients before the pandemic, after the pandemic, we look at how often they're asking questions. We're looking at how frequently they're responding. So in our platform, we can track whether managers are taking action. And a couple of interesting patterns emerged. So the one pattern that emerged is that organizations that are asking the most right now, but are not doing a lot with the data, we're seeing their engagement, we're seeing their participation rates plummet. The organizations that are asking a healthy amount, they're asking frequently, but they're responding the most. They're using the data to navigate the way forward. They're doing action planning. They're doing real work using the data. We see their engagement and participation is skyrocketing. So there's not as much as this notion of survey fatigue as it's inaction fatigue. You keep
Yeah,
you're hearing me, but you're not listening to me. I don't see any
yeah.
results of giving my feedback. So I think right now, regardless of the strategy and the cadence, organizations, the best advice I can give is to ask as much as you're willing to act on it.
Love it. Love it. It makes perfect sense, and I think it's great advice that needs to happen. Otherwise, they're going to lose credibility and disengage as your data reflects. So, yeah, again, Brett, I super appreciate what you're doing individually there as a firm. And how can people learn more about you, Perceptyx, and this research that you just not only wrapped up? I know you're doing it ongoing, but where can they find it?
Yeah, please go to perceptyx.com and you'll see across the top a banner with our insights. You can look at all of our previously recorded webinars, research, and insights discussions. We have multiple ones, as you mentioned, kind of coming up here in the future. There's always decisions to be made and new curveballs that are being thrown at us. So there's no better way than to ask and help guide organizations in that decision making. So please go there and feel free to connect with Perceptyx on LinkedIn or connect with myself, and be sure to keep everyone up to date in terms of what we're finding out during these interesting times.
Yeah. Well, again, Brett, thanks for doing what you do, and look forward to talking again soon. Yeah.
All right.
Be
Thanks,
well.
Al. Have a good one. You as
All
well.
right. You too. Bye bye. All right, well, that's a wrap for this Thursday, July 30th. And thank you for being here. Two quick announcements. Number one, we're going to do the next PAFOW Global Conference on October 5th and 6th. So look for more information coming out in the coming days on that. And it's going to be extraordinarily exciting on a virtual conference platform. So yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. And then we're also going to be doing learning labs. So if you haven't downloaded the PAFOW app and joined the PAFOW community, go there, and we're going to be having 4 to 6 week educational experiences on a variety of topics for those interested in how people, data, and analytics are going to affect the future of work, and vice versa. So thanks for being here today, and see you next week. Bye-bye.